65% of Americans believe intelligent life exists on other planets, according to Pew Research. But what happens when ordinary people, military pilots, and government officials across 3 states all witness the same unexplained phenomenon in our skies? Over 10,000 people witnessed the 1997 Phoenix Lights. The Air Force claimed they were flares from a training exercise, yet Governor Fife Symington, who initially mocked the sightings, later admitted he saw the massive V-shaped craft himself. Kurt Russell, piloting a plane that night, unknowingly reported the lights to air traffic control. These are respected individuals with reputations to protect who still can't explain what they saw. What does it mean when credible people witness something so inexplicable? The night Hollywood met UFOs, Kurt Russell's pilot report. On the evening of March 13, 1997, the skies over Phoenix were particularly clear. Air traffic was routine, with the typical flow of commercial flights making their final approaches into Sky Harbor International Airport. Among those aircraft was a private plane carrying Hollywood action star Kurt Russell and his son Oliver. Russell was at the controls that night, known for films like Escape from New York and The Thing. He was also a highly qualified pilot with thousands of hours of flight experience. His aviation background equipped him with expert knowledge of flight patterns, aircraft identification, and air traffic control protocols. As Russell's plane approached Phoenix from the west that evening, something unusual caught his attention through the cockpit window. In the distance, a formation of lights arranged in a distinctive V-shape moved steadily across the night sky. For a pilot with Russell's trained eye, identifying other aircraft in flight comes naturally, but these lights conformed to no conventional flight pattern he recognized. The formation maintained perfect spacing, appearing more like fixed points of light attached to a single massive object rather than separate aircraft flying in formation. More perplexing was the complete absence of the standard navigation lights required on all aircraft. No red and green wingtip lights, no white tail light, no strobes. Just steady amber-colored lights that moved in perfect unison. What Russell observed next further defied explanation. The object maintained a steady altitude and speed without the slight variations that normal aircraft experience due to atmospheric conditions. Even more striking was the absence of sound. An object of that apparent size should have created significant noise, especially at the relatively low altitude Russell estimated it to be flying. Following proper aviation protocol, Russell reported it to air traffic control. His voice calm and professional, Russell asked the controller if they were tracking any other traffic in the vicinity of his position. The controller responded that their radar showed nothing in that area apart from Russell's aircraft. Despite this, Russell persisted, describing the unusual formation he was observing. This exchange was recorded as part of the standard air traffic control communications, a seemingly routine pilot report that would later take on extraordinary significance. At the time, however, it was simply noted and filed away, with neither Russell nor the controller recognizing they were documenting what would become one of the most witnessed UFO events in American history. After landing safely with his son, Russell didn't make any public statements about what he'd seen. He filed no formal reports and sought no publicity. The incident became just another memory from his flying experience. Unlike many celebrity encounters with the unexplained, there was no press conference or attempt to capitalize on the sighting. Russell simply went about his life, unaware that thousands of people on the ground had witnessed the same phenomenon. The story might have remained a private experience were it not for a remarkable coincidence years later. While relaxing at home with his longtime partner, Goldie Hawn, Russell happened to be watching a television documentary about the Phoenix Lights incident. As the program mentioned an unidentified pilot who had radioed a sighting to air traffic control, Russell had a moment of stunning recognition. "I was watching the show with Goldie," Russell later recalled during an interview on BBC's The One Show in 2017. "And I said, wait a minute, that was me. That was me." The documentary had unwittingly featured Russell's own report, though the identity of the pilot had remained unknown to the producers. "It was this electric moment," he added, "realizing I'd been part of something so much bigger than I ever knew." The weight of that realization, that his routine call had been a piece of a historical puzzle, visibly affected him even years later during interviews. This prompted Russell to search through his flight logbooks, where he confirmed that he had indeed been flying with his son in the Phoenix area on the exact date of the incident. The timing, location, and details all matched perfectly with his memory of reporting the strange lights. What makes Russell's testimony particularly compelling is that he didn't come forward initially. Unlike witnesses seeking attention, Russell had no agenda in reporting what he saw. He was simply doing his duty as a pilot by alerting air traffic control to an unusual aerial object. This inadvertent involvement gives his account a unique credibility. Furthermore, Russell's aviation background allowed him to distinguish between normal aircraft operations and truly anomalous phenomena. He wasn't an excitable novice mistaking conventional aircraft lights for something exotic. He was a seasoned pilot with the technical knowledge to recognize when something defied standard aeronautical explanations. The timing of Russell's report adds another dimension of significance. His radio communication occurred in real time as the event was unfolding, before it had been labeled a mass sighting or given media attention. This contemporaneous documentation eliminates the possibility of his memory being influenced by subsequent reports or coverage. While ground witnesses observed the formation from below, Russell encountered it from altitude, where the size, movement patterns, and unusual characteristics of the lights would have been even more apparent. His pilot's intuition, what aviators sometimes call their aerial sixth sense, told him something truly remarkable was in the sky. The fact that air traffic control radar reportedly detected nothing unusual during this time, despite visual confirmation from both air and ground, adds another layer of mystery to the incident. Either the radar systems were incapable of detecting the object, or the records of what was detected have never been publicly acknowledged. As the Phoenix Lights phenomenon grew into a national news story, with thousands of reports flooding in from across Arizona and neighboring states, Russell remained unaware that his private aerial encounter was connected to a much larger event. He had been an unwitting witness to what would become one of the most significant mass UFO sightings in American history. Mass witness event, 10,000 plus people across 3 states. Russell's experience was merely the tip of an extraordinary iceberg. As his private aircraft descended toward Phoenix that evening, a remarkable phenomenon was unfolding across the southwestern United States. The V-shaped formation that captured the Hollywood star's attention was simultaneously being observed by thousands of witnesses spanning Nevada, Arizona, and parts of Mexico, creating one of the most statistically significant mass sighting events in UFO history. The progression of sightings on March 13th followed a clear geographic path. Henderson, Nevada, 7:55 p.m. Right pointing arrow Kingman, Paulden, Arizona, 8:15 p.m. Right pointing arrow Prescott, 8:25 p.m. Right pointing arrow Phoenix metro area, 8:30 to 8:45 p.m. Right pointing arrow Tucson, 8:50 p.m. Right pointing arrow Mexico. Like a methodical storm system tracking predictably across the landscape, the formation moved approximately 300 miles over 2 hours along a consistent southeasterly course. Tim Lay and his family provided one of the most compelling ground observations from Phoenix. They tracked the object's approach for 10 to 15 minutes in their yard. It was astronomical in size, Lay reported. As it got closer, we could see it was a solid object, an equilateral triangle with lights embedded along the bottom. It moved at about 30 to 40 miles per hour and passed directly overhead at an altitude of roughly 1,000 feet, but in complete silence. This consistency across independent witness descriptions challenged statistical probability. Susan Watson, a former air traffic controller in Scottsdale, emphasized this. When you have thousands of people describing the same specific details, the craft's shape, its behavior, the lighting configuration, without having communicated with each other, you're looking at something that can't be explained away as coincidence or confusion. Law enforcement became documentation centers as their switchboards lit up region-wide. The Phoenix Police Department received over 200 calls within 30 minutes. Sergeant Robert Deo stated, "In my 20 years on the force, I've never seen anything like it." The volume of calls was unprecedented, and what struck me was how similar the descriptions were. These weren't people reporting ambiguous lights. They were describing specific characteristics with remarkable consistency. The witness demographics strengthened the case's credibility. Commercial pilots, military veterans, police officers, doctors, and engineers came forward with detailed accounts. Richard Contino, a Vietnam War veteran and former Air Force pilot, observed from Tempe, "I've flown everything from F-4 Phantoms to commercial 737s. What passed over my house was no conventional aircraft. The formation was too rigid, the lights too steady, and most importantly, there was absolutely no sound despite being at an altitude where engine noise would have been unmistakable." The descriptions contradicted known aircraft capabilities in 2 crucial aspects, sound and size. Mark Rudeffer, an aeronautical engineer in Mesa, noted, any aircraft large enough to account for what people saw, especially at 1,000 to 2,000 feet, would have created significant noise. The laws of physics simply don't allow for silent propulsion at that scale with our current technology. Size estimates from hundreds of witnesses, including aviation professionals, consistently describe the formation between 600 feet and 1 mile wide. For context, the world's largest conventional aircraft, the Antonov An-225, has a wingspan of just 290 feet. Using the held at arm's length measuring technique, witnesses reported the object appeared larger than a closed fist, indicating an enormous physical presence. The documented movement pattern further contradicted conventional explanations. The object maintained steady course and speed without typical deviations or altitude adjustments that aircraft make in response to atmospheric conditions. Despite light variable winds across the region at night, the object showed no signs of being affected as balloons, flares, or other phenomena would have been. Witnesses consistently described seeing a solid structure connecting the lights. Bonnie Lewis, an elementary school teacher in Chandler, watched it pass overhead. The stars were blacked out in the shape of a V as it moved. You could clearly see it was one solid object because it blocked out the stars behind it. This wasn't separate lights. It was a massive, solid thing. Media outlets were equally overwhelmed. Frances Emma Barwood, a Phoenix City Councilwoman, stated that KPNX Channel 12 received over 300 calls that evening. The television stations were flooded with calls, but initially hesitant to report on the phenomenon. When they finally aired segments in the following days, it triggered even more witnesses to come forward. Luke Air Force Base reported unusual call volume, with dozens of citizens inquiring whether military exercises explained what they saw. The base initially responded that no unusual aircraft were operating in the area, a statement that would later conflict with the military's flare explanation. The phenomenon's consistency across a vast area created an evidentiary pattern similar to how geologists might track a single earthquake through seismograph readings at different stations. The data points aligned too perfectly to be coincidental. Dr. Lynn Ketai, a physician who documented the lights and later authored a book on the phenomenon, addressed this. Mass hallucination requires a triggering event and suggestion. There was no unified trigger here. People were in their cars, yards, homes, scattered across hundreds of miles, many in isolation from media or others. Mass hallucination simply cannot account for the consistent reports across such distances. The sheer volume of testimony forced media attention in the days following. Local news outlets initially approached the story with typical UFO stigma, but the credibility of witnesses quickly transformed it into legitimate news. By March 15th, the story reached national outlets, with USA Today running the headline, "Skies Buzzed by Mystery Objects in Southwest. The Governor's Secret, Fife Symington's Public Mockery versus Private Truth." The media attention surrounding the Phoenix lights created an unprecedented situation for Arizona's highest office. As thousands of witnesses demanded answers, Governor Fife Symington found himself at a pivotal crossroads that would lead to one of the most bizarre chapters in political history. On June 19, 1997, more than 3 months after the sightings, Governor Symington called a highly anticipated press conference at the state capitol. Citizens and journalists packed the room, expecting the governor to address the mounting questions about what had traversed Arizona's skies. Symington had promised clarity on an event that had captivated his state and the entire nation. "We're going to get to the bottom of this," Symington announced as cameras rolled. "This is an issue that has garnered serious attention and deserves a serious response." The room fell silent as the governor stepped away from the podium, building anticipation for what many hoped would be an acknowledgement of the thousands of witness reports. What happened next shocked everyone present. The lights dimmed, and when they came back up, Symington's chief of staff appeared wearing a crude alien costume with an oversized silver head. The governor's solemn expression broke into a grin as he announced, "This is the culprit. Case closed." The press conference immediately transformed from a serious inquiry into mockery, with Arizona's highest elected official ridiculing his own constituents' experiences. Meanwhile, across town, former police officer Mark Greenberg, who had witnessed the lights, remained confident in what he'd seen. "I've observed aircraft for 20 years. This was something entirely different. Massive, silent, and impossible to explain away." The backlash was immediate. Phoenix City Councilwoman Frances Emma Barwood, who had formally requested an investigation into the sightings, publicly condemned the governor's actions. People were devastated, Barr would later recall. These were police officers, pilots, everyday citizens who witnessed something extraordinary, only to be treated like fools by their own governor. Local newspapers received an influx of angry letters. One Phoenix resident wrote to the Arizona Republic, "I voted for Governor Symington, but his mockery of thousands of sincere reports shows a profound disrespect for the citizens he serves. I know what I witnessed wasn't a joke." Symington's theatrical dismissal reflected complex political calculation. As a Republican governor in a conservative state with significant military presence, including Luke Air Force Base, Symington faced substantial pressures. The 1990s political climate treated UFO reports with derision, acknowledging such phenomena risk being labeled fringe or unstable. Michael Kristofi, who served on Symington's staff, later suggested the governor was walking a tightrope. There were serious concerns about economic impacts, Kristofi explained. Arizona was aggressively courting aerospace contracts and technology companies. The governor worried that if Phoenix became known as the UFO capital, it could undermine those efforts. The mockery effectively ended mainstream media coverage of the incident. Local news stations shifted to covering the governor's stunt instead of the underlying phenomenon. Within weeks, the story had largely disappeared from headlines, despite the unanswered questions. For the next decade, Symington maintained his dismissive stance. When questioned about the Phoenix Lights in subsequent years, he would reference the press conference with a knowing smile, reinforcing the narrative that the incident was worthy only of ridicule. This public position effectively silenced many witnesses who feared similar mockery if they continued pressing their accounts. The political risks of acknowledging a UFO sighting while in public office were substantial. James Albright, political analyst and author of Public Service and Public Secrets, notes that elected officials who express belief in unexplained phenomena typically face immediate credibility challenges. The political playbook is clear, Albright wrote. Officials who acknowledge UFOs risk their career trajectory, party support, and public image. The safer path is always denial or deflection. This political calculation became even more complicated when, in September 1997, just months after the Phoenix Lights incident, Symington was convicted on bank fraud charges unrelated to his handling of the sightings. With his political credibility already damaged, any admission about witnessing unexplained phenomena would have further undermined his standing during his legal battles. The years passed, and the Phoenix Lights gradually transformed from breaking news to historical curiosity. Symington left office in disgrace following his conviction, though it was later overturned on appeal. Free from the constraints of public office, the former governor's perspective began to shift. Then, in 2007, came the revelation that stunned both believers and skeptics. A decade after mocking the Phoenix Lights with his alien costume press conference, Fife Symington publicly reversed his position in dramatic fashion. Speaking at a press conference organized by former NASA astronaut Edgar Mitchell, Symington made an extraordinary admission. "I'm a pilot and I know just about every machine that flies," Symington stated. It was dramatic. It had a geometric outline, a constant motion, and an overall solid formation. It was enormous and inexplicable. Who knows where it came from? A lot of people saw it, and I saw it too. Most shocking was Symington's admission about why he staged the notorious alien press conference. "I was governor. I had to be careful to maintain a proper skeptical spin because I didn't want to create panic in the entire state. But what I saw was something that defied logic and challenged my reality." Richard Mozer, who had been a senior policy advisor to Symington in 1997, confirmed that the governor had privately discussed seeing the lights immediately after the incident. "He told a few of us that he had witnessed it himself while driving that evening," Mozer revealed in a 2010 interview. But he was explicit that this conversation never happened. The political risks were too great. The revelation transformed the understanding of the incident. Here was the very official who had most publicly ridiculed the sightings now confirming not only their reality but adding his own high-credibility witness testimony. As a former Air Force pilot with extensive flight experience, Symington's belated account carried particular weight. Leslie Keene, investigative journalist who interviewed Symington for her book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record, noted the significance. Symington's reversal demonstrates the extraordinary pressure on officials to conform to expected narratives about unexplained phenomena, even when their personal experiences directly contradict those narratives. Two events. One night, the critical timeline discrepancy. The revelation of Symington's private truth shattered more than political expectations. It exposed a crucial misunderstanding about what actually happened on March 13, 1997. Most people don't realize that what we collectively call the Phoenix Lights was actually two separate events occurring nearly 2 hours apart, a distinction that fundamentally changes the entire conversation about what thousands witnessed. This timeline discrepancy is the key to understanding why the military explanation and witness testimonies seem irreconcilable. They're describing two completely different phenomena. The first event began around 8:15 p.m. as a massive V-shaped formation methodically traversed Arizona airspace on a southeast trajectory. This was the primary object witnessed by thousands across the state, including Governor Symington and Kurt Russell. Observers consistently reported a solid, structured craft with lights arranged in a distinct V pattern moving at a deliberate pace across the state. Mike Fortson, a Phoenix resident who witnessed both events, emphasized this distinction. What most people don't understand is that there were two completely different sets of lights that night. The V-shaped craft came through first, around 8:30. The stationary lights that the military claimed were flares didn't appear until around 10 p.m. In contrast, the second event, beginning around 10 p.m., involved a series of stationary lights hovering over the Phoenix Mountains. These lights appeared suddenly, remained visible for several minutes, and gradually faded from view. This later display was captured in most of the video footage that made it to national television, creating lasting confusion about what witnesses had actually reported earlier in the evening. Dr. Lynn Ketai, who documented both phenomena, noted the stark differences. The V-shaped phenomenon was a singular solid structure moving silently across the valley. The later lights were individual orbs that remained stationary and eventually descended behind the mountains. Entirely different in formation, behavior, and duration. This distinction becomes critically important when examining the military's explanation. 3 months after the incident, the U.S. Air Force officially attributed the lights to illumination flares dropped by A-10 aircraft during training exercises at the Barry M. Goldwater Range. According to their statement, these flares were deployed between 9:30 and 10 p.m. This explanation might reasonably account for the second event, the stationary lights that appeared around 10 p.m. Military flares typically descend slowly under parachutes, can appear to hover from certain viewing angles, and eventually fade as they burn out. From the distance, particularly when viewed from the Phoenix Valley looking toward the mountains, such flares might create the impression of mysterious hovering lights. However, this explanation completely fails to address the earlier V-shaped craft sighting. The timing alone makes it impossible. The V-shaped object had already completed its journey across Arizona by 8:45 p.m., nearly 2 hours before the flares were deployed. Tim Lay and his family, who had perhaps the closest documented view of the V-shaped craft as it passed directly over their Phoenix home, were adamant. We saw both events that night. The V-shaped craft passed right over our house, close enough that we could have hit it with a rock. It was a solid structure, absolutely massive and completely silent. The later lights were different. They were far away over the mountains and didn't move in formation. Former Phoenix Councilwoman Frances Emma Barwood, who investigated hundreds of witness reports, explained, "What's most telling is how the official explanation carefully addressed only the later event while remaining completely silent about the massive craft that traversed the entire state. It's as if they simply pretended the first event, the one thousands of people actually reported, never happened." The military's selective focus created the perfect misdirection, like a magician drawing attention to one hand while performing the real trick with the other. By offering a plausible explanation for the stationary lights, they effectively redirected public attention away from the much more challenging questions posed by the earlier V-shaped craft. Media coverage increasingly focused on the flare explanation, showing footage of the later lights while discussing whether they might have been military flares, all while ignoring the primary phenomenon that had triggered the mass sighting. Reports. Richard Contino, who witnessed both events, observed, "They got everyone arguing about whether those later lights were flares, while completely sidestepping the massive silent craft that had already passed through hours earlier. I saw both. They were entirely different phenomena." This timeline discrepancy explains the apparently contradictory statements from military officials and witnesses. Both could be technically correct. Military flares may indeed have been deployed at 10 p.m., while thousands of witnesses genuinely observed a massive V-shaped craft at 8:30 p.m. The controversy stems from conflating two separate events. The geographic aspects further highlight this distinction. The V-shaped object followed a documented path from northern Arizona through Phoenix and continuing southeast. Meanwhile, the later lights appeared exclusively over the mountains southwest of Phoenix and never moved from that location. Mitch Stanley, an amateur astronomer who observed the later lights through his telescope, reported seeing individual aircraft dropping flares, an observation consistent with the military explanation for the second event. However, his observation occurred well after the V-shaped craft had already passed through the area. Tom King, an aviation expert who reviewed witness testimonies, noted, "The flare explanation might work for stationary lights seen at 10 p.m., but it cannot possibly account for a structured craft traveling hundreds of miles across 3 states." This critical timeline discrepancy reveals the fundamental flaw in dismissing the entire Phoenix Lights incident as misidentified military flares. The explanation addresses only a secondary event while completely ignoring the primary phenomenon that thousands of witnesses, the military response, the states, flares versus governor, formation, actually reported. This answering a question that wasn't asked. Strategy wasn't accidental. When thousands of concerned citizens demanded answers from Luke Air Force Base the morning after the sightings, they were met with something perhaps more unsettling than the phenomenon itself: complete silence. For days, then weeks, no official statement emerged despite mounting public pressure and media inquiries flooding military phone lines. Captain James McAndrew, who later became the Air Force's spokesperson on the matter, would only state that no unusual aircraft activity had been reported during operations that evening. This curious phrasing, focusing on what wasn't reported rather than what was actually happening in the skies, would become characteristic of the military's approach to the entire incident. The silence continued for nearly 3 months as witness accounts spread across Arizona and into national media. During this period, military officials declined all interview requests while conducting what they described as an internal review of the events. This extended delay proved strategically valuable, allowing public interest to diminish and memories to fade before any official position was established. When the Air Force finally broke its silence in June 1997, their explanation addressed only the 10 p.m. event. The lights were merely LUU-2B illumination flares dropped by A-10 Warthog aircraft during a training exercise at the Barry M. Goldwater Range, approximately 60 miles southwest of Phoenix. According to the military statement, these flares were deployed between 9:30 and 10 p.m., creating the illusion of strange lights in the sky. Colonel Edward Jones, commander of operations at Luke Air Force Base at the time, stated, "These particular flares are dropped from aircraft by parachute. They're designed to illuminate a large area on the ground for about 5 minutes. The hanging flares would naturally be in a straight line when viewed from below, accounting for what people thought was a formation." However, this explanation creates a stark contrast with what witnesses actually reported. The LUU-2B flares used by A-10s descend while suspended under parachutes and burn with intense white light, significantly different from the amber glow reported by witnesses observing the V-shaped craft. Former Air Force munitions specialist Craig Stevens highlighted this discrepancy. Military illumination flares create intense white light that's almost painful to look at directly. They don't produce the steady amber glow that witnesses describe. And they don't maintain perfectly level formation while descending. They drift with air currents and descend at visible rates. The military explanation becomes especially problematic when considering the testimony from trained observers. Captain Marvin Jones, a retired Navy pilot with 5,000 flight hours, witnessed the V-shaped formation from his backyard in North Phoenix. "I've deployed and observed illumination flares dozens of times in my career. What passed over Arizona wasn't flares. Flares don't maintain perfect geometric spacing while traveling 300 miles. Flares don't move in unison against the wind. And flares don't fly in formation for 2 hours." Former Air Force radar operator Jack Wilson expressed similar concerns. "The flare explanation is insulting to anyone with military experience. Flares create distinctive radar signatures as they deploy and descend. They have predictable burn durations and descent patterns. And they're used for specific tactical purposes. In designated areas, they aren't dropped in formation to cruise across 3 states." Even James McGaha, a former USAF pilot and astronomer who initially supported the military explanation, acknowledged its limitations. While the 10 p.m. lights over the Estrella Mountains are consistent with illumination flares, this explanation cannot account for the earlier V-shaped object that traversed the entire state. Those are 2 separate events requiring 2 separate explanations. Military protocol further contradicts the official account. Illumination flares are typically dropped in combat zones or designated training areas to illuminate ground targets for night operations, not for extended transit across civilian airspace. The Barry M. Goldwater Range is specifically designated for such exercises because it's remote and controlled, unlike the corridor across populated areas where the V-shaped craft was observed. Major Robert Powell, former Air Force intelligence officer, noted, "The flare explanation fails basic scrutiny. At typical deployment altitudes, flares would be visible for at most 10 to 15 minutes before burning out or descending below the horizon. They cannot account for an object observed for nearly 2 hours across hundreds of miles." Perhaps most telling is what the military statement didn't address: the V-shaped craft seen hours earlier. By focusing exclusively on the later stationary lights over the mountains, the explanation neatly sidestepped the more challenging aspects of the sightings. The massive size, the perfect V formation, the silent movement, and the interstate journey documented by thousands of witnesses. Timothy Cooper, a former Pentagon analyst who reviewed the case, observed, "The military response followed a classic limited hangout strategy. Acknowledged the aspect of an incident that can be conventionally explained while ignoring elements that cannot. By addressing only the later flare deployment, they created the impression of having explained the entire phenomenon when they'd actually explained less than half of it." The military's response also ignored crucial radar data. While officials initially claimed no unusual returns were detected, air traffic controllers later revealed that unidentified objects were indeed tracked moving across Arizona airspace, information conspicuously absent from official statements. When pressed about this discrepancy during a public forum in Phoenix in 1998, military spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel James McAndrew deflected, "Our statement addressed specific operations conducted by Luke Air Force Base on March 13th. Radar data from civilian facilities falls under FAA jurisdiction, not military purview." This careful distinction, separating military operations from air traffic control observations, allowed officials to make technically accurate statements while avoiding the larger question of what was actually transiting Arizona airspace that evening. If thousands of witnesses, including military veterans and pilots, saw something that couldn't possibly be flares, what exactly moved silently across Arizona's skies that night? The physical evidence, photos, videos, and radar data. The disconnect between what thousands witnessed and what officials claimed their instruments detected represents perhaps the most puzzling aspect of the Phoenix Lights incident. While military and FAA representatives maintained that nothing unusual appeared on radar that night, several air traffic controllers later came forward with contradictory accounts. One controller who worked at Sky Harbor International Airport during the incident, speaking anonymously to researchers in 2000, claimed that unknown returns did indeed appear on their screens, moving in a pattern consistent with witness descriptions of the V-shaped formation. This contradiction raises troubling questions. If radar systems genuinely detected nothing, how could an object reportedly large enough to block out stars and spanning hundreds of feet across remain invisible to our detection technology? Conversely, if radar data did capture something unusual, why would this information be withheld from the public? Former FAA official Bill Schumann provided a carefully worded statement in 1998, noting that absence of radar confirmation does not necessarily indicate absence of an object. This nuanced phrasing left open the possibility that radar data existed but was being carefully managed by authorities. The physical evidence from the Phoenix Lights incident creates a complex puzzle. Despite thousands of witnesses, the photographic and video evidence captured that night remains relatively limited and often inconclusive when viewed in isolation. Most images show only points of light against a dark background, without clear definition of the structure witnesses described seeing between those lights. This discrepancy between what people reported seeing with their eyes and what cameras captured created an evidence gap that skeptics have used to dismiss the phenomenon. The technological limitations of consumer cameras in 1997 explain much of this gap. Amateur photographer Susan Watson expressed profound frustration after attempting to document the V-shaped craft. "My 35mm camera simply couldn't capture what I was seeing. The autofocus wouldn't lock onto the object, and when I switched to manual, the exposure settings were impossible to get right for something that dark against the night sky." Watson later described feeling a sense of helplessness as she realized the historical moment she was witnessing would be impossible to prove with her equipment. Consumer cameras in 1997 used film with ISO ratings between 100 to 400, requiring long exposures for night photography. Without specialized equipment, Most witnesses captured only blurry images that failed to convey the scale they observed. Digital cameras, still in their infancy with resolutions under 1 megapixel, performed poorly in low-light conditions. Similarly, consumer camcorders using analog formats like VHS or Hi8 had poor low-light sensitivity. Mike Christen, who filmed from Scottsdale, noted that what looked massive and clearly structured to my naked eye became just a few dots of light on my camcorder's tiny viewfinder. Among the most compelling documentation came from Dr. Lynn Kitai, a physician whose evidence suggests the Phoenix Lights phenomenon wasn't limited to a single night. Dr. Kitai had photographed similar formations in the same area on January 23 and February 6, 1997, weeks before the mass sighting. Using a 35mm camera with telephoto lens and high-speed film, she captured amber orbs in triangular formations that appear strikingly similar to what thousands would later report on March 13. "I wasn't looking for anything unusual," Dr. Kitai explained in later interviews. "These objects appeared, and I happened to have better equipment ready because of previous sightings." Her photographs, showing similar formations weeks apart, suggest the March 13th event may have been part of a pattern rather than an isolated incident. This repeated presence challenges both the military flare explanation and the notion that the Phoenix Lights represent a one-time event. The most distinctive feature of the photographic evidence is the steady amber color of the lights. Analysis of video footage shows no variation in color or intensity typical of conventional aircraft navigation lights or military flares. Aviation consultant Michael Tanner examined multiple video sources and noted, "The constant color temperature and lack of flickering is inconsistent with combustion-based illumination like flares, which show subtle variations in brightness as their magnesium-based compounds burn." Forensic video analyst Robert Powell identified another peculiarity. The lights maintain perfect relative positioning to each other throughout their trajectory. This rigid formation behavior is inconsistent with separate aircraft or independently descending flares, which would show slight variations in relative positioning over time due to individual air currents. The radar question connects directly to these inconsistencies in the official explanation. While authorities insisted nothing unusual was detected, insider accounts tell a different story. Former FAA air traffic controller Mark Schaffner made a significant claim in 1999 that exposes potential information suppression. Controllers were told not to talk about what they saw on their scopes that night. The unofficial word was that unknown returns were tracked moving southeasterly across Arizona, but this information was classified almost immediately. This claim aligns with statements from retired FAA Western Region Communications Manager Richard Haynes, who revealed in a 2001 interview, "There are established protocols for handling radar data related to unidentified aerial phenomena. When military interests are involved, civilian air traffic control data can be classified retroactively. This procedure would explain how officials could truthfully state, 'No radar data is available,' while avoiding whether such data was initially captured and subsequently classified." Former Luke Air Force Base radar technician James McGillicuddy further challenged the official narrative when he stated in 2000 that military radar systems are significantly more sensitive than what the FAA uses for civilian air traffic control. The notion that an object of the reported size could transit Arizona airspace without triggering any military radar detection strains credibility. Aviation expert Richard Dolan points to a crucial distinction in how officials worded their statements. Note that military spokespeople carefully stated that no unauthorized or unidentified aircraft were detected. This phrasing allows for the possibility that something was detected but was either classified or not categorized as an aircraft in conventional terms. This semantic precision mirrors how officials handled the timeline discrepancy, addressing only the later flare event while remaining silent about the earlier V-shaped craft. When pressed specifically about radar tracking of the V-shaped formation, military officials consistently redirected questions to the FAA, while FAA representatives deferred to military authorities, creating an effective information loop that prevented clear answers. The psychological impact, how witnesses' lives changed. As officials continued their bureaucratic ballet between agencies, thousands of witnesses struggled with a far more personal dilemma. How do you integrate an impossible experience into your understanding of reality? For many professionals like Dr. Lynn Kitai, this question would ultimately transform their entire lives. "I was not a UFO enthusiast," Dr. Kitai emphasized in her documentary. "I was actually quite skeptical about the whole phenomenon." As a respected physician directing the preventive medicine program at the Arizona Heart Institute, she had built her career on evidence-based science. Yet her direct observations of the Phoenix Lights phenomenon utterly transformed her life trajectory. I actually gave up my medical career to pursue understanding what this phenomenon was, she revealed, abandoning 2 decades of prestigious medical practice to investigate something that challenged her entire worldview. This radical professional pivot affected others similarly. Commercial airline pilot Jim Babbage described his internal crisis. When you see something that essentially shouldn't exist according to everything you've been taught, it creates a kind of cognitive earthquake. I questioned whether I should report what I saw, knowing it could affect how people perceive my judgment in the cockpit. For witnesses with technical expertise, the conflict between observation and explanation created particular distress. Richard Contino, with his military aviation background, found himself obsessively researching aircraft capabilities after his sighting. I kept thinking I must have missed something. I spent months looking for explanations and came up empty. That's when I realized this thing had fundamentally changed how I understand what's possible. The psychological impact often followed a distinct pattern. Initial excitement or terror during the sighting gave way to confusion, followed by an urgent need to validate the experience. Retired Police Sergeant Robert Deo noted, "First, you're stunned by what you're seeing. Then you question your own perception. Finally, you desperately want someone else to confirm they saw it too, for your own peace of mind." This validation seeking created what psychologists later identified as confirmation communities, groups of witnesses who found each other after the incident. Susan Watson, who photographed the lights from North Phoenix, explained, "Before connecting with others who saw it, I was starting to question my own sanity. The relief when I heard identical descriptions from complete strangers was overwhelming. It was salvation for my sense of reality." These informal support networks eventually formalized into regular meeting groups throughout Arizona. The Phoenix Lights Network, founded in 1998, became a central hub where witnesses could share experiences without fear of ridicule. Psychologist Dr. Gary Schwartz, who studied the impact on witnesses, noted, "These communities served a crucial therapeutic function. Witnesses experienced reality shock, the psychological distress that occurs when direct experience contradicts one's fundamental understanding of how the world works. For many witnesses, the Phoenix Lights created a stark division in their lives, a split-second fracture in reality that permanently separated their before and after selves." Tim Lay, whose family watched the V-shaped craft pass directly overhead, explained, "There's who I was before March 13th, and who I became after. The change was about recognizing how fragile our consensus reality actually is, how quickly everything you think you know can be upended." The transformation extended to close relationships. "My husband didn't see it. He was inside," recalled Bonnie Lewis. "Our marriage struggled for months afterward because we suddenly lived in different realities. He couldn't understand why I couldn't just move on from what I'd seen." For professionally credible witnesses, speaking publicly often came with significant costs. Former air traffic controller Mark Schaffner described being marginalized after discussing radar anomalies. "Colleagues started questioning my reliability. It didn't matter that I had 20 years of spotless service. Once you're associated with UFOs, everything you say becomes suspect." This professional risk created a secondary trauma, the inability to speak their truth without consequences. Military veteran Jack Wilson found this more disturbing than the sighting itself. "I saw something that contradicted my training, but I could process that. What I couldn't process was being told I should keep quiet about it to protect my reputation." The experience transformed many casual observers into dedicated researchers. Dr. Kitai's path from physician to investigator exemplifies this. "I never intended to write a book or produce a documentary," she explained, "but the need to understand what happened became all-consuming." Her transition from skeptic to advocate wasn't motivated by belief in extraterrestrials but by the need to reconcile her direct experience with scientific understanding. This pattern repeated across fields. Aeronautical engineer Mark Rodeffer abandoned his focus on conventional aircraft design to study advanced propulsion theories. "Before the Phoenix Lights, I dismissed alternative propulsion concepts as science fiction. Afterward, I realized our current understanding of physics might be far more limited than I'd been taught." The sighting created a lasting shift in how witnesses evaluated information. Many developed heightened skepticism toward official narratives while becoming more open to unconventional possibilities. Former FBI agent Manuel Gomez explained, "The experience made me both more skeptical and more open-minded, skeptical of authorities claiming definitive explanations, and open to phenomena that don't fit neatly into current scientific models." This reorientation came with profound philosophical questions about reality itself. Former Luke Air Force Base technician James McGillicuddy described grappling with existential uncertainty. When you witness something that shouldn't be possible, you question what other, impossible, things might actually exist. For many witnesses, the ultimate impact was intellectual humility. Frances Emma Barwood, who investigated hundreds of reports as a Phoenix City councilwoman, described, "Before the Phoenix Lights, I had confidence about how the world works. Afterward, I developed a reverence for mystery, an acceptance that reality might be far more complex than our current frameworks can explain." This reverence for mystery became a common thread among witnesses who integrated their experience into a new worldview. Dr. Kitai captured this sentiment. "Eventually, I stopped needing absolute answers and became comfortable with profound questions." That shift, from demanding certainty to embracing mystery, was perhaps the most valuable transformation the experience created. Scientific theories, explaining the unexplainable. As witnesses chose truth over comfort, scientists faced the daunting challenge of explaining what thousands had observed that March night. The Phoenix Lights created a rare scenario where established scientific frameworks collided with widespread, consistent human testimony, producing a genuine tension that continues to provoke serious researchers today. The scientific method requires us to consider all possibilities, even those that seem uncomfortable or extraordinary, explains Dr. Eleanor Halverson, astrophysicist at Arizona State University who specializes in atmospheric phenomena. With the Phoenix Lights, we have multiple competing explanations, none of which fully satisfies all the evidence. Scientists have proposed several conventional explanations, each addressing certain aspects of the sightings while struggling with others. These range from atmospheric effects to classified military technology, organized from most conventional to more speculative possibilities. Among the most frequently cited explanations is the atmospheric refraction theory. This hypothesis suggests that temperature inversions, where warm air sits above cooler air, contrary to normal conditions, could have bent light in unusual ways, similar to how desert mirages make distant objects appear to shimmer or float. Meteorologist Thomas Kaplan, who studies unusual atmospheric conditions, points to documented inversion conditions on March 13, 1997. Temperature inversions can create mirage-like effects, particularly with distant light sources. Aircraft lights viewed through such atmospheric lenses can appear to merge together, creating the illusion of a single large object when multiple smaller objects are present. However, Dr. Halverson notes critical limitations. Atmospheric refraction could potentially account for visual distortion, but it doesn't explain the reported perfect formation maintained over hundreds of miles, nor the complete absence of sound from what witnesses described as a massive, low-altitude object. Astronomical explanations have also been proposed. Philip Karcher, astronomer at Lowell Observatory with decades of experience tracking celestial events, examined sky charts for that evening. The night of March 13th presented fairly typical astronomical conditions. No remarkable celestial events coincided with the timing of the sightings, and celestial objects maintain fixed relationships to each other. They don't form perfect V formations and travel across state lines. More intriguing is the classified military technology hypothesis. Defense analyst Catherine Reeves, who has documented previous instances of secret aircraft development, explains, the military has a documented history of developing aircraft decades ahead of publicly acknowledged technology. The B-2 Spirit bomber flew for nearly a decade before being officially revealed. It's entirely possible that what people witnessed was a classified prototype being tested under cover of darkness. This theory addresses the geometric formation and deliberate flight path but encounters significant problems regarding scale and propulsion. Aerospace engineer Martin Chen, who designs propulsion systems, highlights the contradiction. No known or theoretical aircraft design could achieve both the reported size, up to a mile wide, and the completely silent operation. Even our most advanced stealth technology merely reduces noise. It doesn't eliminate it. A craft large enough to match descriptions would require propulsion systems that would be audible for miles. Some researchers have suggested plasma phenomena, naturally occurring electrical effects in the atmosphere. Electrical engineer Dr. Sandra Thompson, who studies atmospheric electricity, explains, the Earth's atmosphere can generate plasma formations under certain electromagnetic conditions, similar to how the northern lights create structured patterns in the sky. These can appear as organized structures of light that move in response to geomagnetic fields. While this theory addresses the luminous, Quality. Dr. Thompson acknowledges limitations. Plasma phenomena are typically diffuse and do not present the sharp, geometric edges that witnesses describe. They also don't typically maintain consistent formation over hundreds of miles of travel. Psychological explanations have also been proposed. Psychologist Dr. Alan Berkowitz, who specializes in collective witness phenomena, suggests human perception is remarkably susceptible to suggestion. Once initial reports describe a craft-like appearance, subsequent witnesses are primed to interpret ambiguous stimuli in similar ways, much like how people in a darkened room might all see movement after someone mentions a shadow. Yet this explanation struggles with a fundamental issue. While psychological factors almost certainly influence some reporting aspects, they can't explain away the core observations made independently by thousands of witnesses across 3 states, Dr. Berkowitz admits. Aviation expert William Drescher proposes a hybrid explanation. The most likely scenario may involve multiple factors, perhaps military aircraft flying in formation, their appearance distorted by atmospheric conditions, combined with later flare deployments. But even this complex explanation struggles with the reported size and silence. The scientific community's inability to provide a satisfactory conventional explanation has led some researchers to consider more exotic possibilities, including non-human technology. Science progresses by investigating anomalies, phenomena that don't fit our existing models, explains physicist Dr. Raymond Keller, who studies scientific paradigm shifts. The Phoenix Lights represent exactly such an anomaly. When thousands report something that defies conventional explanation, the proper scientific response is curiosity. What makes this case particularly valuable to researchers is its unique combination of factors: massive witness numbers, consistent descriptions across geographic distance, credible observers including government officials and pilots, and the failure of conventional explanations to fully account for all reported aspects. This case forces us to acknowledge the limits of our current scientific understanding, says Dr. Halverson. Whether the explanation ultimately proves mundane or revolutionary, the Phoenix Lights demonstrate why maintaining scientific humility is essential when confronting phenomena that challenge our established
from Phoenix
frameworks.
to Pentagon UFO program.
While scientists grapple with the limitations of existing frameworks, something far more profound was unfolding behind closed government doors. The Phoenix Lights didn't just challenge scientific understanding. They became a catalyst for institutional change that would eventually reshape how government approaches unexplained aerial phenomena. In 1997, when thousands witnessed the massive V-shaped craft over Arizona, the official government stance on UFOs remained firmly rooted in the post-Project Blue Book era. Following the Air Force's closure of its official UFO investigation program in 1969, a policy of institutional indifference had taken hold. UFO reports were treated as irrelevant distractions, regardless of witness credibility or evidence quality. This dismissive approach was exemplified by the Department of Defense's reluctance to acknowledge the Phoenix incident. Even as military bases fielded hundreds of calls and local officials demanded answers, the Pentagon maintained its decades-old position. UFOs represented no threat to national security and thus warranted no serious investigation. Behind this public facade, the Phoenix Lights created significant internal tension within military and intelligence communities. Former Pentagon analyst Victor Marchetti revealed that the scale of the Arizona incident prompted classified discussions about potential security implications. When thousands of citizens witness something extraordinary simultaneously, including pilots and police officers, it creates an intelligence problem that can't simply be dismissed through the usual channels, Marchetti explained in a 2004 interview. His statement highlights how mass sightings fundamentally change the calculus of institutional response. This internal pressure contributed to a gradual but revolutionary shift in government approach. By 2007, a decade after the Phoenix Lights, high-ranking officials began breaking ranks with established policy, like pieces falling in a long dormant domino chain. John Callahan, former FAA Division Chief of Accidents and Investigations, publicly disclosed his involvement in a 1986 Japanese Airlines incident involving an unidentified aerial craft. After the Phoenix event made national headlines, I felt more comfortable coming forward with what I knew, Callahan stated. That night in Arizona provided a kind of permission structure for officials like me to speak more openly. The Phoenix incident established a template for documenting and analyzing seemingly impossible aircraft capabilities: massive size, silent operation, and structured formation. This template informed more formalized approaches to similar phenomena, essentially creating a blueprint that future investigations would follow. In the same year, former Governor Symington finally admitted witnessing the Phoenix Lights. The Defense Intelligence Agency established the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP. Luis Elizondo, ATIP's former director, confirmed that historical cases like the Phoenix Lights provided valuable comparative data for more recent investigations. Congressional interest evolved similarly. In 2022, during the first public hearings on unidentified aerial phenomena in over 50 years, Representative Andre Carson specifically mentioned the Phoenix Lights as deserving renewed analysis with modern investigative techniques. This evolution from ridicule to recognition transformed Arizona itself. Like a community healing from a shared trauma, the state has reclaimed its unusual heritage. Since 2007, annual Phoenix Lights festivals have drawn thousands of attendees. The Arizona Historical Society maintains a permanent archive of witness testimonies, treating the incident as significant regardless of its ultimate explanation. The Phoenix Lights Trail now takes visitors to key viewing locations from 1997, while the annual Lights Over Phoenix Symposium attracts researchers and witnesses nationwide. What was once mocked by the state's governor has become part of Arizona's cultural identity, a transformation many viewers asked about earlier in our exploration. The incident's influence extends to scientific discourse as well. Dr. Peter Storick, Professor Emeritus of Applied Physics at Stanford University, cited the Phoenix Lights in advocating for scientific protocols for investigating UAP cases with thousands of witnesses, like Phoenix, demand a structured scientific approach rather than dismissal or ridicule. Storick argued in his 2018 paper. His perspective reinforces what we discussed about witness reliability. When thousands observe the same phenomenon, the collective experience becomes scientifically significant. International cooperation shows similar influence. France's government-sponsored GIPAN revised its investigation protocols in 2013, specifically citing the Phoenix case as evidence that mass sightings require coordinated governmental response beyond simple explanations. The Phoenix Lights helped establish a compelling argument for transparency around UAP. As former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Christopher Mellon explained in 2021, cases like Phoenix demonstrated that when government refuses to address widespread public sightings transparently, it doesn't make the phenomenon disappear. It simply erodes public trust and encourages speculation. This argument gained traction, addressing the public trust issues mentioned by viewers earlier. The 2023 National Defense Authorization Act established whistleblower protections for government employees reporting UAP encounters, directly responding to historical cases where officials like Governor Symington felt unable to speak truthfully about their experiences. Dr. Halverson sees this government evolution as equally significant. We've witnessed a remarkable policy transformation, from actively discouraging serious inquiry to actively soliciting reports and establishing formal investigation protocols, she noted in a recent interview. In many ways, the true legacy of the Phoenix Lights may not be what happened in the skies that March night, but how it forced institutions to reconsider their approach to the unexplained. The event demonstrated that when thousands witness something extraordinary simultaneously, dismissive explanations and institutional silence become untenable. Today's more nuanced government approach to UAP, acknowledging unknown objects in our airspace while avoiding speculation about their origin, can be traced through a lineage that includes the 1997 Arizona incident. The Phoenix Lights help demonstrate that unexplained aerial phenomena represent legitimate security, scientific, and public interest concerns that deserve serious investigation. The UAP Disclosure Movement. From ridicule to recognition. The strategic shift from ridicule to congressional hearings represents one of the most dramatic policy reversals in modern history. When Governor Symington staged his alien costume press conference in 1997, not even the most optimistic UFO researcher could have predicted that within 25 years, the Pentagon would be releasing official UAP footage and intelligence directors would be testifying under oath about unexplained craft in our skies. This evolution from dismissal to investigation required a complete restructuring of institutional attitudes that once treated UFO witnesses as delusional or attention-seeking. The mockery that witnesses faced in 1997 has transformed into legitimacy, with military and intelligence officials now regularly briefing lawmakers on unidentified objects with capabilities beyond known technology. In December 2023, the UAP Disclosure Act was incorporated into the National Defense Authorization Act, requiring intelligence agencies to release records related to non-human intelligence. This legislation mandates a review board to examine classified UAP information for public release, an approach inconceivable during the Phoenix Lights era when officials defaulted to denial and debunking. Senator Marco Rubio exemplifies this transformation. In 2021, he stated, "There's a stigma on Capitol Hill. Some of my colleagues are very interested in this topic and some kind of giggle when you bring it up. But I don't think we can allow the stigma to keep us from having a serious, fact-based analysis of any activity in our airspace." Such sentiment from a senior Republican senator would have destroyed careers in 1997. The Pentagon's 2020 acknowledgement of 3 UAP videos captured by Navy pilots marked a crucial turning point. Department of Defense spokesperson Sue Goff confirmed their authenticity. This validation from military leadership stands in stark contrast to the flare explanation provided after the Phoenix Lights. In June 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released an assessment examining 144 UAP reports from government sources. The report concluded that most of the UAP reported probably do represent physical objects, and that some UAP appeared to remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, or move at considerable speed, without discernible means of propulsion. These official findings align precisely with what Phoenix witnesses described. Former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense Christopher Mellon has become a vocal advocate for transparency. For too long, the stigma associated with UAPs has gotten in the way of good intelligence analysis, Mellon stated in 2022. Pilots avoided reporting, or were laughed at when they did. 25 years ago, someone with his credentials speaking so directly would have faced severe professional consequences. The congressional hearings that began in 2022 show the starkest contrast with the post-Phoenix era. Representative Mike Gallagher questioned officials about objects moving between air, water, and space. Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence Scott Bray acknowledged these reports present challenges to conventional understanding. This public dialogue would have been unthinkable in the 1990s. Phoenix witness Tim Lay expressed vindication when watching the hearings. After decades of being dismissed, seeing Congress take this seriously felt like finally being heard. The ridicule we faced for simply reporting what we saw was painful. Now the very institutions that mocked us are admitting there's something real happening in our skies. Public opinion has undergone an equally significant transformation. According to Gallup, in 1997, 47% of Americans believed UFOs were real. By 2021, that figure had risen to 68%. In 1997, only 18% believed some UFOs involved alien spacecraft, whereas recent polls show that figure at 41%. People now feel comfortable expressing these views publicly. In May 2022, NASA announced it was commissioning a scientific study of UAPs. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson stated, "NASA is positioning itself to take a leading role in this new field of study with traditional scientific methods." This endorsement from the premier scientific agency of the federal government signals a fundamental shift from fringe curiosity to legitimate inquiry. The terminology shift from UFO to UAP proved crucial in this transformation. Former ATIP Director Luis Elizondo explained, "UFO carries cultural baggage and stigma associated with little green men. UAP allows us to have a conversation without all the baggage." This created space for serious discussions previously stifled by ridicule. In 2022, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office was established within the Department of Defense to investigate UAP reports. AARO Director Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick told Congress in 2023, "UAPs pose potential flight safety and general security risks. We are approaching this in a rigorous scientific manner." The Phoenix Lights continue serving as a reference point throughout this transition. During intelligence briefings, officials have cited the Phoenix case when discussing the need for structured approaches to multi-witness sightings. Former intelligence officer David Grush specifically mentioned the Phoenix Lights during congressional testimony as a historical case deserving renewed examination. "When I saw military pilots being taken seriously about their UAP encounters," says Phoenix witness Lynn Kedai, "I thought about how differently our experience might have been handled today." The government's transformation on this issue has been healing for those of us who were brave enough to come forward back then. As disclosure continues, many wonder what might be revealed about the Phoenix Lights. Will classified radar data finally be released? Do satellite images exist that were never acknowledged? The answers may emerge as barriers to information continue to fall. Just as the mysterious lights that appeared over Phoenix challenged witnesses to trust their own perceptions in the face of institutional denial, today's revelations challenge us all to reconsider what we thought we knew about our place in the cosmos. After 25 years of investigation, the Phoenix Lights phenomenon stands as one of the most significant unexplained aerial events in modern history. What sets this case apart is the thousands of witnesses, the involvement of prominent figures like Governor Symington and Kurt Russell, and how this incident catalyzed a fundamental shift in our approach to the unknown. The true legacy of the Phoenix Lights lies in the questions it forced us to confront. From congressional hearings to Pentagon programs, what was once dismissed has become the subject of serious inquiry. Sometimes the most important discoveries begin when we acknowledge what remains beyond our understanding.